It's June 2017 and I'm talking to Reverend Michael Heaney, former chaplain of the college who worked here for many, many years, and I'd like, Michael, you to take us back to your first impression of the college when you arrived in 1966.
Well, I graduated from Trinity College and I put in a number of applications, and one of those applications was to that place up the mountains behind those walls. I'd lived in the area for years, so I knew it was there. And surprise, surprise, I got a very nice letter back from the then warden, Martin Argyle, to say would I come and talk to him, which I did on the Thursday afternoon. And I remember seeing, as I walked in the main door here, seeing Bud McMullen coming up so sure of himself. And I said, that's the sort of man I want to be. Anyway, Martin was so nice to me and he brought me into the common room for a cup of coffee afterwards, and then he said he would let me know about it. And I had to respond by the following Saturday, which I did. And I got a reply on the Monday to say I had the job. I had 2 jobs that weekend in 2 different schools, and thank God I chose St. Columba's. So that was how I got here. And I came here to teach mathematics and physics, mathematics under Victor Bond, physics under Adrian Summerfield, and also, as a sort of sop to me, you can teach some geography too, which I did. And I did that for a number of years. So that's why I came, and of course I was going to coach rugby as well, and then I did my diploma alongside the almost full teaching program. Martin Argyle said to me, well now Heaney, you're joining a community. I don't expect you to go out during term time. And you know, nobody did. It was 15 weeks, no half terms, no Exodus weekends. It was 15 weeks, and the children had no exeats for at least the new pupils anyway for 2 months, and everybody else had 2 or 3 exeats each term, depending whether they were senior students. The place was a community. I lived in actually the garden cottage upstairs where Willis had lived until I came, and every morning it was 8 o'clock in those days, the Grange house, which lived where Iona is now, came pounding round. It felt like Jericho, and I wondered which morning the house would actually collapse around me. But then one went over and one had a marvellous breakfast in the common with the other members of staff. That doesn't happen now, but that was really part of the college. Then chapel, gowns, surplices on Sundays. It was just a whole wonderful experience, and I look back at it. I just sank into it.
To move away from the academic areas of the college, which activities did you particularly become involved in and interested in those early years?
Well, I got involved in drama. Off stage, it was building stage, lights, sound, that sort of thing. Enjoyed that. I got dragged into the Young Farmers because actually I had studied agriculture for 2 years and worked in a farm as part of my undergraduate degree course. So I ran the Young Farmers Club for numbers of years, and then various other things like the sailing club turned up and I began to run that. But literally, I think again going back to something Martin Argyle had said or implied, get yourself stuck in, young man, and you'll make yourself a job. And that was it. I just got stuck in, and it actually never stopped.
And so we move on to 1976 and a major change in your life and in your work in the college. Can you tell us about that?
Well, by 1976 I had been studying and training as an external student at the Theological College in Rathgar for Ordination in the Church of Ireland, and it was one experience for the college, and those who were there remember it on Sunday evening when I was ordained by Archbishop Buchanan in the chapel to be a deacon, and I was to be assistant chaplain to Bert Walsh, who had been the kindliest person to me as a young teacher. I think I mentioned in an article in the bulletin there that he brought some of the young teachers down each Sunday night to coffee and scones, which he baked himself. And so he brought me on, and he was a most humble person. I mean, he tried to make me chaplain in 1976, and wisely David Gibbs said, well, let's just take a little time. And so in 1977 then, in Christchurch Cathedral, I was ordained priest. And from then on, I was assistant to Bert taking every second chapel, half the week's chapels, and preaching regularly on Sundays. So that was a wonderful experience. I don't think I assisted him with confirmation classes. He carried those on until I became chaplain. So chapel took a large part of my life from then. Always regular in chapel. I love the chapel service. Well, the chapel is an integral part of the college foundation. The college, St. Columba's College, is a Church of Ireland foundation. And the regular attendance in chapel by those who, as the present warden has said, believe or don't believe at this present moment of time, is part and parcel of the breadth of the college. And so I think one of the greatest moves was to get all to Braddon into chapel, and that came around in 1986 when the gallery was put in. And so for a period of time, in fact, we were down in Whitechurch Parish Church for Sunday services, which again was its own experience, walking down the dark with lights in front and lights behind. So that was very important, that everyone should worship in chapel. And I suppose that's a challenge as numbers increase again now, that everybody should be there. It's very difficult to put your finger on it, but it is an essential part. And the Sunday worship too. We used to have evensong every day, as well as morning prayer. And then on Sunday, Saturday evening was very special evensong. And then on Sundays, more three services, Holy Communion, Matins and evensong. And that's down to one service a Sunday now. But that's important.
So we've now arrived at the mid-1980s, the end of the David Gibbs era, then the beginning of the Tim Macy era, 1988. What kind of school had St. Columba's become about 20 years after you arrived?
Been a lot of change in the grounds, in the buildings and the grounds, the use of buildings. For example, in those years we had the AstroTurfs and we had the sports hall. We had the new library, which replaced the old biology lab. We had 2 new classroom blocks built in David Gibbs's time. And then moving on to much later, I suppose, in Warden Hazlitt's time, we had the change of the Cadogan building into a music school, and we had the building of the Grange House. And so huge changes on the campus. And then little changes happening all the time. I was just saying in the office, I came in this morning, as I came up the Kennedy steps, and I'm immediately noticed the loss of the laurel tree there. And then you turn left to go along by what was called Singleton and the junior library. You take a step which doesn't exist because it's all tarmac now. It used to be dirt. So the grounds themselves have, they in fact are so tidy now. The pathways, the lighting, that is very different because you used to trudge around in shoes in very, very puddly, muddy paths. And it's a very wet place. And I remember somebody saying, when you come here, you buy yourself an umbrella. So those are the sort of changes I can remember. And the changes of names and the changes of views. For example, the Arthur Barton room, which was the senior reading room at the far end of Iona House, which was the Fellows Building. And that was lost as a senior reading room when it became Fraser Morris's French classroom. But people have forgotten that that was in fact in memory of Archbishop Martin Barton.
So obviously there have been huge changes in the physical environment, the physical fabric of the college during your time. But how do you feel the actual pupil body has changed during those years?
Well, it had changed a lot because the school I came to in 1966 was a school of about 180 pupils in 4 boys' houses. And then by 1970 we added to Braddon House, which I became housemaster of. And that added initially 7, then 12 by the end there, and then about 24. And then in 81, the first girls came. They were sisters of boys who were already here. And so there were only about 5 girls then. But by 1983, there were girls in all the forms, and we'd become fully co-ed at a rate of about 1 to 2, perhaps, in the school. So that was a huge change, because it not only meant a change in buildings and use of buildings, it meant a change in, one hesitates to say, boys' attitudes to lots of things.
For the better?
They were distracting, and so some for the better, and some were distracting. Yeah. So the boys were less likely to get involved in clubs, for example, which had been the mainstay. I mean, we mentioned the sailing club and the farmers' club, but there was the biology club, there was a small animals club, there was a chess club, there was a woodwork club, there was an art club, there was a photography club. These things were all going on, and they were the occupation for the boys in those long out-of-class times when they weren't actually running around in games fields or up mountains. So that was a huge change. I think probably the coming of the girls was the death knell to a lot of the societies. Yeah.
So Michael, you retired in 2008, but you then stayed on another year as chaplain. But you've remained very close to the college, you live just down the road, you've taken some services in chapel. Now that you're standing back, looking at all those decades, looking at the college a little bit from the outside, what is your final impression of this place?
I would think that, that one of the big changes that you're alluding to there is the fact that it become, in a way, more democratic. It had become a much more flat management system. And whereas Warden Argyle and the sub-warden would have taken many of the decisions in the early days, and then David Gibbs came in and would have done very much the same. He was his sub-warden, Norman Lush. They would have tended to make a lot of the decisions that happened with little reference to the head of the department and so on from time to time. But with Warden Macy and Warden Hazlitt, things became very much flatter, and they both set up committees which were, I suppose, consultative committees in which you sat. And becoming part of that one became aware that there was a lot going on in the college which you had some small input in, or maybe a large input in, or where you had your hand on the tiller in certain areas and perhaps could hold on to a standard which you perceived should be there. So I would say that the wardens became a little bit more consultative with the staff in general. And we had these, remember we had these large meetings at the beginning of term where everybody came along and they presented their ideas and discussed their ideas. I would see that as the biggest change. And then, of course, the involvement of parents' associations, management, the college management, the fellows and so on. These different layers all led to a greater input from a greater number of people. Well, looking back, obviously, the right thing to say is the 43 years seem to have flown, and where did they go? But that's, everybody feels that. Ideally, one wouldn't like to have seen the college change at all. It was grand in the 60s and the 70s. But practically speaking, it has moved with the times, and the clientele have changed. But the core values of the college haven't changed. The things that people do really haven't changed. And one of the aspects that I have really found exceptional is the way in which, having left the college, one has been accepted back and welcomed back to things like chapel, plays, music events, obviously St. Columba's Day. But one's 43 years of being a colleague have continued through the years of retirement. I think that has been something to cherish. But it says something about the college that this is a community, and everybody involved in that community will continue to be involved and cared for.
So Michael, after you retired, you did something a little unusual. You set up a kind of social club for former colleagues who worked here a long time and called it Page 4. Could you tell us a little bit about how that's working?
Well, when I retired, I realised there were a lot of my former colleagues who were out there somewhere. They came to St. Columba's, but in common room, we chatted every break and over tea in the afternoon, and this was lost. And there were a number of people out there who would like to meet each other again. So we looked in the Green Book and we found the staff were listed on Page 4. So we coined the name for a biannual lunch as a gathering of Page 4. And up to 20 past staff and their wives or their spouses meet for lunch twice a year. A very pleasant occasion. We come at about 12:30 and leave about 3. And the conversation just goes on where it left off the last time. And that has been That has been an exceptional experience for some of the older members of staff now who are moving on to their 80s and further. So that's page 4, and as you say, we're going to welcome Gary and 3 other colleagues to page 4 in the autumn when we meet again. John Flanagan has been a help with the gathering as well. But it is a gathering. Nobody need come, and very often they don't come, but when they do come, they enjoy what happens. Yeah. I'd like to say before we finish that how much the college has to thank Bert Walsh for his time here, and it gave me great pleasure to set up the organ fund, the restoration fund, in memory of Bert Walsh, and that has been going now for 8 years, and the organ is going to be finished next year, hopefully, and it's a very suitable memory, and the Walsh family are very pleased that we've had a number of events in which the family have been taken part, and there's a plaque now on the organ memorialising those events. So yes, absolutely, and a fitting memorial to him indeed. But finally, I mean, I'd have to thank at the end of a conversation like this for all the colleagues which I spent time here with, because we're all great friends, we're all working colleagues, and we share honestly our aspirations for the college, and that has been good.
Reverend Michael Heaney, former chaplain of the college, thank you very much.
Thank you, Julian.